Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. I want to thank John for bringing me up, and I want to just recognize two members of the Comptroller's Office who play a major role watching the city's finances. The first is Elena Gilligo, our first Deputy Comptroller, and Pressa Niblak, the Deputy Comptroller for Budget in our office. So thank you, John, and also thank you to my good friend Tom Allen for putting together what looks like another great event. And the truth is, these meetings are very important because the more conversations we have about our budget and the more sunlight we have on government, the better we are all off as a city. Budgets aren't about just dollars and cents, and they're not just about line items or numbers on a page. They're about priorities, and they're about who we are and who we want to be and what we want our city to look like down the road. Budgets tell us where we are financially and where we're going in the future. And that's why careful analysis is important, and that's why thoughtful discussions around the budget process is critical. So when you invited me here this morning, I couldn't wait to have a discussion about our priorities and where we're going. So let me just give you a quick overview of where I see the city economy today. And I have to say the New York City economy is very strong. Since the Great Recession, New York City has added 635,000 jobs since 2009. And that totals an historic high of nearly 4.4 million jobs. Now that's an average of 90,000 new jobs each year. And unemployment rates are actually down in all 5 boroughs. So there's a lot of good news for New York City over the years, and I think we should appreciate the leadership of this city and the people who every day work hard to get New York to a place where people can be successful financially. But we also have to look at the bad news. And going forward, I have to say the horizon looks a little cloudier. It wasn't too long ago that our economy was roaring ahead at a full sprint. Today, it's moving forward at a slow walk. Last year, we saw signs of slower growth, which may continue in the years ahead. And just as we anticipate a slowdown, never before has New York City been so uncertain about what we can expect from Washington. You have to understand, over $7 billion or 1 out of every $12 spent in our city comes from the federal government. It's only been a month, but it's clear the White House acts first and thinks later. And we have a president who's willing to change decades of American policy in 104 characters in a 5 a.m. tweet. The truth is, this is actual madness for people who have to think about city and state budgets. We can actually, unfortunately, expect this president and this Republican Congress to put our most vulnerable citizens in New York at risk. We rely on the city, on the federal government rather, 124,000 families who rely on HUD Section 8 vouchers to make their rent every month. The nearly 770,000 low-income and elderly households who get federal assistance to keep their homes warm. And the 105,000 job seekers who got help finding a job at city workforce centers last year. You know, we get almost $200 million for food stamps and more than $300 million for school lunches. We rely on the government, the federal government, to protect our elderly and our children and our homeless, the people who are part of our safety net. And it doesn't just stop with simple funding. I worry that the looming threat to repeal the Affordable Care Act and with the potential of millions of additional New Yorkers being uninsured, the burden on our public hospitals could grow dramatically. Public housing, job support, affordable health care, these are foundations of our social safety net. They now all hang in the balance. This is the greatest threat from the federal government since New York City was on the edge of bankruptcy in the 1970s, and another president told New York City to drop dead. In fact, I think we could all agree, whether it's national security or our budget, this presidency poses a threat to our budgets and also our democracy. So the uncertainty from Washington, coupled with the prospect of an economic slowdown, should be a wake-up call that we must plan ahead, that we have to think of our budget not just in terms of the 4-year financial plan, but we have to think about where we're going to be down the road for the next 10 years. And based on the analysis my office has done, I'm actually concerned that we're not doing enough. So consider this, and this is going to wake you up. You're going to be so excited when I talk to you about this. I'm going to talk about something called the budget cushion. Okay, come, it's okay. Okay, Preston loves the budget cushion. So the budget cushion is the amount of reserves we have available at the beginning of each fiscal year to help us get through an economic downturn or federal budget cuts or another storm. Right now, as our budget grows, we may start the coming fiscal year with a cushion of $8.5 billion. Now, that's 10% of spending. So in New York City budget, we basically have put away $8.5 billion. Now, that's actually down from last year when our cushion was 11% of spending. And it's dramatically down from 2009 when we had built up a cushion of over 17% of our overall budget. The point is, at a time when clouds may be coming, at a time when budgetary uncertainty from Washington abounds, we may not be doing enough to save. We have to recognize that whether it's an attack, God forbid, whether it's a hurricane, or whether it's a Trump presidency, money in a crisis that we've put aside evaporates like that. We've seen it time and time again. Now, the mayor is on the right track with his citywide savings plan. He estimates that $2.1 billion between this year and next will be saved, and I support that effort. But I believe we have to dig a little deeper. We found that agency efficiency savings, that's where commissioners sort of scrub the different agencies and they try to find efficiencies, way to put aside money within those agencies. That part of the savings plan has resulted in a paltry $138 million savings. We have not really had a PEG or an efficiency program in the last 3 budget cycles, and I believe that that exercise will result in savings of hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We have to continue to do that work and that savings because we want to put away enough of a cushion so that if the bad times truly come, and if we can't stave off the Republican Congress and Trump, we have to make sure that we continue to provide essential services. We're never going to go back to the 70s when it was a choice between layoffs and bankruptcy. And the best antidote, the best way to prevent that is for all of us to understand that we have to do more efficiency savings and get us up to as close to 17% savings as we can. That means in this preliminary budget, we need to have another $1.7 billion in savings. Now, I don't think that's going to happen this year, but I am hopeful. The mayor has talked about moving forward, adding another $500 million to the savings plan. So I think, again, part of my message to all of you today is putting aside money today is very good for the business of New York City. So we talk a little about savings, but budgets aren't only about savings. We also have to consider how we spend our money. And last night, a record number of homeless New Yorkers slept in a shelter. Homeless is reaching never-before-seen heights in New York. And in just the last few years, citywide spending on homelessness has nearly doubled. Doubled. From $1.2 billion 3 years ago to $2.3 billion today. This year, it's projected to increase, according to my office, by another $460 million over last year. The explanation for the increases is simple. The city is placing families in commercial hotels, which offer almost no services and an exorbitant cost of hundreds of thousands of dollars per day. That's right, we spend $400,000 every night to put people and families with children in commercial hotels with no services and no hope. Commercial hotels cost the city $102 million in calendar year 2016. So we're warehousing families with children in commercial hotels that literally are breaking the bank. We do not have a clear action plan to solve the problem, and without a concrete roadmap to tackle this crisis, I fear that we're merely throwing money at a problem without delivering meaningful results. Now, the point I raise here is this. Budgets shouldn't just be about allocating money. Spending cannot always be on autopilot. Our budget process should be about having thoughtful conversations as to whether our policies are working. Analysis by the IBO, analysis by the Comptroller's Office, robust hearings from the City Council, City Hall trying to measure success, failure in a most transparent way so we can get our arms around a crisis that is eating at the heart of New Yorkers. And I will tell you, every time I go into a homeless shelter and see a family with a little girl doing her homework, it is absolutely staggering to think we, in the greatest, most economically strong city in the world, actually have an exorbitant homeless crisis. We have a moral imperative to have these conversations, and that's why today is so important to discuss budgets with the eye on actually looking at dollars and families and the most vulnerable in the city. Now, we have done audits that show that our homeless children are living in some of the most deplorable conditions imaginable. These shelters have vermin and mice and mold surrounded by holes in the walls, housing that is abhorrent to any one of us. We as a city are defined by how we treat our children, and I do believe that to my bones. We aren't living in a fair city when my 2 little boys can come home to a safe meal every night, but other kids are living in terrific conditions. Now, we owe it to them, our kids, the kids that are not ours, the kids we may never meet. These are our children, the children of New York City. We can't just throw money at the problem anymore. We have to have a comprehensive plan to build a brighter future for them and give them a fair shot in the future. It's not just a budgetary challenge, folks. It's a moral one. And I just want to leave you with a couple of other thoughts. Now, I'm a big believer, as Robert Rodriguez knows from El Barrio. We're in East Harlem. And when I was borough president, we did a lot of community engagement. So I believe in community-based planning. It's hard work. But when we do strategic, long-term, boots-on-the-ground, localized city planning, every neighborhood in our city has better outcomes. And I think, to a certain extent, we should apply that to budgets as well. We need to look not just at today, but tomorrow. We need to identify not just the big-picture economic indicators in the years ahead, but what our local neighborhoods will need to plan and thrive further down the road. Real, meaningful community engagement on the budget process is critical so that local leaders not only understand what the current budget impacts might be, but also they can help strategically plan for our local communities in the future. So when you look back over the last few years, New York's growth has been extraordinary. You only get that moment once in a generation. And now we may be able to, we're starting to slow down a little bit. The question isn't whether the economy has been red hot over the past few years. The question is what we did to improve New York City when the economy was thriving. And in a few years, we're going to look back at this moment and ask ourselves whether we made the tough decisions, the right decisions. We'll be judged not just today and not just tomorrow, but a generation from now about whether we seized this moment when surpluses were sky high. We'll be asked if we launched truly game-changing initiatives and whether we took groundbreaking approaches to change lives, to fundamentally transform our city. We're big enough, we're bold enough, but at this moment in history, did we act that way? Did we build housing that was truly affordable for all of our communities? Did we forever transform public education? Did we set ourselves up to be a robust, growing city in the 21st century? Did we tackle the issue of infrastructure or permanent poverty? Did we take these years, these robust years where the city led the recovery all over the country, and did we use these last few years to truly shape what New York is about and what our priorities are about? We're going to be judged as business leaders, as elected officials, and community organizers. So today is the day for all of you in this room to ask the panelists the tough questions, to ask me no tough questions, and to make sure that all of us are involved in the plans for the future of our city with all the transparent tools at our disposal, from Checkbook NYC to all the ways we can look at budgets and do this analysis. It's an extraordinary time to measure where we are and where we're going. But you can't measure success or failure with just having bureaucrats behind closed doors. We've got to budget with the people. We have to build housing with the community. We have to transform our homeless shelters as a beacon for helping our children. I believe it starts with pen to paper, or at least email to email, as we go through the laborious task of shaping this extraordinary budget. It's an honor to be here today with all of you, and I wish you great success with the conference. Thank you very much. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. If you can stay there for just a minute, Controller.
I'm not moving.
We do have a few of those tough questions for you. And if anyone else has questions on their card, just hold your card up. Alexis will come by and grab it for you. The first question from Rebecca Sauer: how do you recommend we house homeless New Yorkers while cutting spending?
So I want to thank you for being here today. And no, it's a great question. So you can't always be the critic in chief. You actually have to come with your own plan and your own vision. So let me tell you what I would do right now to tackle homelessness. First of all, there's about 2,400 families with children in our commercial hotels. Those are the hotels we're spending $102 million a year on. I would take the vacant units at NYCHA, which my audits estimate are at least 2,000 apartments, quickly refurbish them. Some haven't been fixed up to 8 to 10 years, and take as many of those children and get them into NYCHA. That is step one. Two, the link voucher. It is simply outrageous that the landlords are not complying with the link voucher. We should create a multi-agency task force to literally enforce the law and end discrimination and get people into those apartments with a voucher. 30% of people live in homeless shelters. They have a job, they're working, they just need an affordable apartment. And three, this housing plan, right? These rezonings that have been rejected by practically every community, I think there's merit to them. But the housing that they're building is very expensive housing with smatterings of housing that is not permanently affordable. So in a lot of our neighborhoods, we are building housing that's, quote, affordable, but it's not affordable for the people in the community. So East New York, Brownsville, the AMI for this housing is 46%. The AMI in Brownsville is 32%. 55% of the people can't afford the housing. So we have to build affordable housing that is actually truly affordable for the people in the community. And lastly, this city must pass a land bank land trust bill to look at the 1,150 vacant lots owned by the city that I identified in an audit 2 years ago. And that's where we can build the next generation of affordable housing. The same way LaGuardia built public housing, and the same way the Mitchell-Lama housing program was created. You have vacant property, you have delinquent property. Let's marshal this city land, this city valuable property. This is our land, folks. It's not their land. Give it back to the people. Get not-for-profit organizations involved, and let's solve the homeless crisis. Let's move the 30% into affordable housing. Let's do it now, not 10 years from now. So we have got to act. The era and the time for studying and analysis and agonizing over the homeless crisis, let's get moving. Let's put it all out there. Let's create the kind of energy. Let's bring in the private sector and create an energy around the city that says, we're not going to put one more child in a homeless shelter because we have the tools available to change their lives. Why wouldn't we do that?
Thank you. We'll be getting to healthcare momentarily in the third panel this morning, but there is one specific question on that front as well here. From Louise Cohen: assuming Medicaid becomes a state block grant or per capita cap, what will be the impact on New York City's economy, and what are potential mitigants?
It will be bad. So look, we've had, the city came up with a transformation plan for our public hospitals, for health and hospitals. The city's contributed over $1 billion added to the spend to help our hospitals that were fragile. And if you start block granting Medicaid, if you start removing people from the Affordable Care Act, where we have 1.6 million people, we could end up collapsing the hospital system. The transformation plan did not take into consideration what's coming from Washington. The fact that we could not only block grant, we could lose $200 million in federal money. In fact, if I had more time here this morning, I would tell you that at the end of the day, one of the big risks in this budget is the potential hole that the healthcare system could create for the budget. It's about $305 million. So we worry about that as an assumption, whether it's with the rating agencies or the state regulators. Healthcare gets the least attention in the discussion, but it has the biggest potential for not just hurting the average New Yorker, but also collapsing the economy.
Sure. And then just one question I had. On the top level with the New York City budget, spending is going up $12 billion since Mayor Bill de Blasio took office, from Bloomberg's last budget to this proposed budget. Is that alone a concern for you?
You know, look, the budget, the raw numbers continue to increase. What worries me is actual spend and savings, right? So the mayor would argue, well, we are saving more because look at the raw numbers. But the raw numbers are not the issue, right? If budgets go up, then we need to make sure the savings is at an appropriate level. 10%, $8.5 billion, is inadequate to meet the Trump Republican challenge, and unfortunately an unforeseen disaster that occurs more than we would like. So I do think that, look, there's been a lot of legitimate expenses, a lot of increased spending that has, I think, gone for good purpose. But are you putting away enough for the challenge time? And are you spending with an eye towards solving the big problem? See, I don't have a problem spending money on homelessness. Who would have that problem, right? I worry that we don't have a transparent mechanism to monitor success or failure. And that's not an attack on anybody. That's just what government's supposed to do.
And that's all we have time for, unfortunately. Thank you, Comptroller. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.